Welcome everybody to episode 12 of Black, Brown, Yellow, White. And today I have the great joy, pleasure, and honor to have with me Giggs Kgole. Is that correct?
Yes, it's Giggs Kgole.
Giggs Kgole, a South African artist born in 1997 who is known for his very vibrant 3D style art, celebrating, among many other things, the African heritage. Born in 1997 in Limpopo, he began crafting mud figures around the age 3 or 4. By 19, he was a finalist for the Sasol New Signature competition and mentored by artist William Kentridge. Despite early challenges, he has achieved international recognition with numerous solo exhibitions, a Young Masters Art Prize, and his own gallery, Gas Lamp. He is a recipient of the People's Choice Award for his piece God Ke Mama. He received a presidential scholarship to study in Rome, and Kgole's work across different media reflects his commitment to African stories as well as connection to emerging artists. So thank you very much for having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me for this episode, Kanda.
The
Decided to
first
talk and
one, the first one, and is a bit difficult or very difficult. It's the idea to get to know you a little bit as the protagonist of the interview. Could you give your biography, your biopic, in a very, very condensed version, like the 2-minute version of your life, if such a thing is possible?
a 2 minutes version of my life is I grew up, I was born in South Africa, grew up in a township called Tembisa,
Mhm.
and then from birth and then raised in the village in Limpopo. So I pretty much grew up a very simplistic life in terms of just like hunting, herding my goats, collecting water from the river.
Yeah.
And then that was such a very calm, peaceful life. And then later on in my life, in my childhood, my parents then moved me to a smaller town called Kingston Park, where I went to primary school there, close to where my dad lived and
Mhm.
worked. And in this primary school education, I got to explore art more. I got to explore myself more and my creativity from creating clay figures into now understanding what the word art meant for the first time. And also in terms of like holding and having access to like pencils, colors, and drawing skills. And I think at 10 years old, I was just very, very, very intrigued in terms of like the concept of art and art history for the first
Yeah.
time. And I wanted to explore more and I wanted to learn more about like art masters. But a lot of my education was based around European masters. And there was a
Mhm.
part of me that felt very sad that I didn't get to see or experience or get to learn more about like African art masters. Um, Fast forward when I was 12 years old, my dad tells me I can't go to high school because of our financial situation at
Yeah.
home, which then prompted me to really figure out like how do I solve this little issue in terms of obtaining a secondary education.
Yeah.
I then went to Saturday school through a bridging program called SSP, which means stands for Student Sponsorship Program, which then sent me through Saturday schools for the whole 2010.
Yeah.
When everybody was going for like the World Cup celebrations on Saturdays and
Oh
Sundays, I
no,
was just going to school Monday to Saturday, Monday to Saturday.
that's
Uh, at
awesome.
the at the end, out of a pool of 3,000 students, I was then selected as one of 25 students to
Wow.
earn a full scholarship. And in that full scholarship then placed me at a private school in Johannesburg called St. John's College,
Mm.
which then from 14 years old, being at a private school, 14 to 18 years old, at this
Mm.
private school, it allowed me to really expand on my knowledge, expand
Yeah.
on my art making, expand on my self identification, and just like understanding where I want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And at 16, I got this opportunity to go on a global exchange program at my high school called a student exchange program. And I got to go to this high school called Glen Almond College in Scotland. And
Yeah.
going to Scotland really opened up my eyes to becoming a global citizen. As during my time there, we got to get visited by different universities and work away opportunities, which then really allowed me to realize like, hey, Gates, you understand, like in such a short period of 16 years,
Yeah.
you've been able to move out of like a township such as Tembisa, live in a village in Limpopo, move to a small town, and then move to a private school. And then now you are globally traveling the world, and you're at this international high school.
Yeah.
And there's opportunities for you to get a tertiary education and study abroad. You should really tap into that. But also at the same time, it's like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Correct. And that was the challenge for me between 16 and 18 to really redefine myself and figure out like what I would love to do.
Yeah.
And then at 16, we had workaways at my high school. And then I did an architectural program, I did an artist program. But then art was the consistent calling for me. And I realized, like,
Mm.
you know, it's a calling beyond just painting and sculpting. I feel it in my blood, I feel it in my dreams, I feel it in the work I do and how I speak to people. So I spoke to my art teacher and I made her realize, like, hey, look, I want to become an artist, but I want to be a globally recognized artist.
Yeah.
Please help me get there. My art teacher really then took me as a student and then moved me from being a student artist to a professional artist from 16
Mm.
years old and until the age of 18, where I was just getting critiqued, going for extra classes, going for gallery exhibitions, going for museum meetings, and really just performing at a high level to the
Yeah.
point where with high school, at the end of high school, I got my honors in art. I won all the art awards I could win in my high school and as well as outside of my high school. And I just kept on telling people like, hey, I'm going to become a globally recognized artist. Um, and just shouting it out around like the
Yeah.
Joburg spheres till the point of finishing my last exam and then realizing all my friends were going to all these universities and I
Yeah.
had gotten accepted to all these universities abroad and as well as in South Africa. But then the issue was funding again.
Mhm.
But by God's grace, 4 days after my last exam, I get a call from William Kentridge asking for an interview because he had heard about me from the Art Awards and as well as people around the global sphere speaking about this kid who comes from Limpopo, has earned the full scholarship, and he wants to participate and become an artist. So they thought like, William, this is somebody that you should look into and try and mentor. So then I get an internship from 2016,
Yeah.
which was meant to be a year-long internship. But I did the internship within 6 months, and within those 6 months, I took advantage of working extra time, like working the Saturdays and Sundays, even if I wasn't paid, just to learn from the curators who were coming in, to learn from the people who were moving around William's space. And
Yeah.
then at 6 months, I realized, like, hey, Giggs, it is time for you to step out of this bubble
Mhm.
that you're in within William's circle and explore the options that you have and go out into the world and start telling your story. And then I moved from talking to William about being an intern to being a mentee, and then he accepted that proposal. And
Mhm.
then I started producing my own works. And
Mhm.
then 2 months after my internship, I then applied for the SASO New Signature, which then kind of then broke me into the professional art scene in South Africa,
Yeah.
making me the youngest finalist at 19 years old as part of the top 100. And then 3 solo exhibitions then followed after that. And after the successful third solo exhibition, which the third solo exhibition was with a gallery called
Mhm.
Everard Reed in Johannesburg, that then propelled all my other international universities to follow up on my deference of my university, asking what was going on.
Yeah.
And I explained my situation like, hey, I have all this talent and all the skills, and I'm really excited and I want to earn a tertiary education,
Yeah.
but I cannot afford to put myself in terms of like an international university.
Mhm.
And then one of the universities, John Cabot University, which is an American private university in Rome, Italy,
Yeah.
heard the story, and then they then propelled and then started a youth scholarship opportunity called the Presidential Scholarship, of which I
Ah.
was the first recipient of. And
Mhm.
then this global scholarship then allowed the university to realize, like, hey, you know, there's many Giggses out there from different parts of the world, and we
Yeah.
should really explore in terms of like finding these talents and offering these scholarships to deserving students.
Oh,
And then I
absolutely.
then pretty much 2017 I started my education, and as well as juggling my education and my art career, and then
Yeah.
which then turned into an international art career from 19 till right now when I'm 27 years old.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I'm very happy for you. So you've really also had the way you describe it, almost the nomadic lifestyle and seeing many different parts of the globe, just South Africa, Scotland, Italy. And I was thinking, this is one of the first questions that I asked in interviews is, for you, it's difficult to say, but what have been sources of inspiration? You know, it could be people, it could be works of art, books, cultural practices. What have been your main sources of inspiration for you?
You're right. Like I've really lived a nomadic life from a very young age. As I left home at 13 years old. Even being raised, I found myself being raised by different people. That's why I feel like I have many mothers and fathers
Yeah,
out there in the world. People who've taken me into their homes, and I find that as part of my source of inspiration, the different homes that I grew up in. I find my friends as a source of inspiration,
yeah,
in the sense of they've been able to bring me into their different worlds and the different spheres. They've been able to make me realize the privileges that they've had and the privileges that I've then gotten to sort of earn and adapt and also just be around, just being surrounded by them.
hmm,
But the biggest source of inspiration that I always grew up with, it has to be like the woman in my life. And these would be like my grandmother, my mom, and my sister. Just
yeah,
seeing sort of like from coming from the hardship that I came up with, but despite the hardship, seeing like how empowering these women are, that they never let not having, they never let their situations of where they come from define them. They never let the situations of communities and societies that they grew up in define them as people,
yeah,
and how they've been able to like raise uh, uh, families, right? How they've been able to adapt to the environment, and as well as be able to give love. Um, be it in a matriarchal setting and also being it in a patriarchal setting too. And then found that a lot of like the people around my high school, being my teachers, my sporting coaches, to be a really good source of inspiration. And then I believe that my inspiration then developed as soon as like I started traveling abroad at 19 years old. When I fully started traveling abroad and living in different parts of the world, I found that travel became a very, 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 very good and main pivotal part of my inspiration. And I realized that gigs traveling for me really started before I even started doing it abroad. I started traveling in terms of like the township that I lived in terms of the
yeah,
village, the different villages that I moved in, the different cities that I moved in within the country. And then that turned into a global stage when I started um, traveling abroad, but within traveling abroad, learning the histories of different places, it being the villages that I'm living in, or it
yeah.
being learning from the people. And then
Uh-huh.
my academics in terms of like studying art history and studying communication and as well as entrepreneurship, became another source of inspiration. And so taking all these sources of inspirations, they always like help me sort of redefine who I am, and they always remind me of where I come from,
Yeah,
in order to understand where I am currently, and also to understand how and where I want to go to, and how do I get there, and where do I go, and who do I go with, and who do I take with, right? Because sometimes you go with people, but you also sometimes when going with people, you also need to remember to take people along this journey with you.
yeah. I was just thinking now as you were describing this wealth of your inspirations that it immediately evoked the images of your artworks in my mind because they're also this wealth and this many layeredness so that I almost had the idea that the wealth of your sources is very much, it seems to me, manifest in your work.
No, absolutely. I think in terms of like what travel and meeting a lot of people has really inspired and instilled in me
Hmm.
is understanding and being calm with solitude. And then within solitude, you really get to not only just meditate, but you also get to listen to what your body needs. You get to listen to what your mind is telling you. And I find that that really clears me in terms of like the dreams that I have and how do I record these dreams and how do I then take these dreams and make them a reality. It being and dreams can be in elements of like good dreams, bad dreams, and as well as dreams that of confusion, right? And it's like then I find that art for me, or making art, making music, is like a form of language that I can then use to like express and like communicate these feelings that I have to the
Yeah.
world.
Okay. Thank you very much for putting it so elaborately. I will now jump to the heart of the interview and then loop back to the theme of art. Namely, it's very blunt, but the question is, what to you is your understanding of racism, and where do you see its causes and where do you see its effects?
Um, I feel like racism is it's rooted in ignorance to begin with. Ignorance that sometimes prejudices that are inherent, right? So I don't think a child is born racist. I feel like it's things that we adopt from the world around us, in being our parents, right? Our parents teaching us, or the environments that we're in, sort of instilling these beliefs, sets of
Mm.
beliefs and morals towards other human beings. And I feel like the ignorance is in the sense of um, not willing to also understand, not willing to get to speak to people. And
Yeah,
I will always tell my friends, like a lot of my friends, like, you know, we all have like this inherent racism within us, even if we don't know it, because we are we're surrounded by like set beliefs and stereotypes that we adopt, and we adopt around traveling, we adopt around nuclear families that we surround ourselves. And I found myself like, you know, the more I surround myself with different cultures, the more I surround myself with different languages, the more I
mhm,
surround myself with different people, I too get to break down barriers that I've maybe had or built over time. And then
yeah,
I start getting to understanding the human being, right?
mm,
And I feel like that's what's important, is like understanding the human to human, despite the skin color, despite the language, despite the place of birth, right?
yeah,
And then once you start understanding the human being, you can then make a decision on if you like that human being or you don't like that human being.
mhm,
Um, but it's really rooted in the fear of not wanting to get to know each other, not breaking down our walls and our barriers to getting to understand, and believing that, hey, what we think is right and what they think is wrong. Because you see, once we put up those walls of they and their and us,
mm,
it really kind of like enforces and instills like this prejudice and this racism that like we inherit, and we, because I don't think no child is born hating one or the other. I feel like
yeah,
it's something that we really are taught.
yeah.
We really, really are taught this.
And if you look at it, whether it's individual or systemic, this racism, where do you, in your opinion, do you see some of its effects, its pernicious effects?
Oh, definitely. I feel like on my personal life, on an individual basis, um, I always tell people like, hey, I've experienced racism from like my own home country, and then you feel like, you know, when you experience it in your own home country, you're prepared for it, right?
Hmm.
Until you travel and experience it in a different context in a different
Hmm.
country. So for me, specifically in Rome, when I started experiencing racism in Rome, at first my first route was like, oh, this is racism, and then I was like, no, maybe it's a language barrier. So then I
Yeah,
had to give myself time to like, okay, understand the language, and then within understanding the language, you start realizing like, okay, this is not racism, or like certain interactions are not racist,
Yeah.
but then certain interactions are, because you start understanding like, okay, this person has an inherent belief and ideology that is like sort of like placed on people of a certain skin color, and then when you start like having conversations with people who
Hmm.
are like racist, right? You start really challenging people, and you start understanding like where it's coming from, right?
Yeah.
And then I find that I really find those really interesting, especially with people who are willing to engage. That sometimes like it's coming from past experiences of like, hey, maybe it's the media that's influenced them, or hey,
Yeah.
maybe something bad happened to them that was caused by somebody of a particular race, and then that's why now they believe that. And then for some people, you just realize like, hey, man, there's just some people on earth who are just bad people, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really okay. But then once you understand that, you also start realizing like, hey, I can choose for my own mental health to avoid these spaces and avoid these spaces. But I found that systematically it's very oppressive, and it's so like mentally draining. And sometimes I found myself having to, it's forced me to like seek therapy a lot of times, and also like within my career to want to quit, right?
Yeah.
In the sense of like traveling, you get racially profiled a lot. So, like when I travel, and like it being an instance of like, if I pull out the green passport, I get
Yeah.
treated a certain way, or just by means of like, oh, I show up, and then I'm asked 1,000 questions about like, why are you coming to this country, especially the UK, which is a very problematic country
Yeah.
for me to travel when I usually go into the UK. I'm asked to like provide like banking statements. I'm asked to provide home addresses. I'm asked to provide who I am, and like, and it's sort of like I question myself as a young man. It's like, why am I put in a position to prove myself so many
Mm.
times at the airport, if I've already proved myself through applying for the visa or going for the visa interviews, and then now there's like another set of walls that are put in place, and these are systematic walls are put in place because of maybe immigration issues or
Yeah.
migration issues that a specific particular country might have, and obviously that country then labels a certain race to be a problematic, or like a certain skin tone had to be problematic. And then but on an individual basis, I feel like it's very degrading. It's
Yeah.
on a human to human level. It's very very harsh and degrading. And then for me on a travel basis, I find that I have to travel a lot for my work, and
Yes.
then and I find myself sometimes there'll be shows that I have to go to in the UK, and then I get racially profiled, or like I'm kept at the airport for hours on end, and I
Yeah.
find myself crying, and then asking myself particularly, or calling my parents like, why am I consistently having to go through this, and on a personal level, why am I putting myself through this if I know this is what I'm going to experience, and
Yeah.
why do I then continue to make art, or project my art, or exhibit my art in this country, and then also
Yeah.
give to this country, if this country, on entry of this country, I'm treated like this. And then within the country itself, you get people who are just like ignorant and are mean to you. And then you ask yourself like, why do I continue to do the thing that I absolutely love, and have to face these walls and barriers that human beings put on each other?
Mm. I'm very sorry to hear that it's this constant, like you say, degradation and having to prove yourself that you are who you are at the border, to the police, at the job, to the boss, that you do everything 1.5 times as good as everybody else. Um, yeah. And in terms of differences, because you've traveled all these places, have you and I was thinking maybe mostly South Africa and Italy, have you seen differences in how they how they how they approach diversity, how they approach people from a different background, South Africa and Italy?
I've definitely seen multiple differences within my country too. Um, but I felt because I have to be in these situations, there's a level of adaptation where, and I find it very sad that
Mm.
I have to then change myself in the way I like in certain places. I know, okay, gigs tie your hair a specific way. When I have dreads, I know I
Mm.
tie my dreads a specific way, and then I won't be questioned as much.
Yeah.
Or the way I pronounce or speak the language, so that I change my accent, or the way that I communicate with people. You find ways that, okay, I had to now psychoanalyze a human being that's gonna I have to interact with. Do they like sports? Do they like this? Are they smiling? Are they having a good day? And then I find myself like now having to manipulate myself and then manipulate the situation that I'm in. And and I, it's very toxic. I have to say, it's
Yeah.
completely very toxic that a human being needs to manipulate a conversation, manipulate themselves, or change themselves, and in order just to get by. And so, in certain countries like Italy, I know that okay, um, maybe in specific places, I put on my American accent.
Yeah.
Uh, in the UK, I know that I put on a more British accent. In South Africa, I put on maybe a more South African accent, or I talk about in certain places, depending on the if it's in a posh area, I would put on like a posh accent.
Yeah.
If it's like if I'm in the hood or in the township, I put on my local accent, and so like these adaptations um, has really it disfigures me on a personal level because
Mm.
I already, as a South person, I understand I have multiple personalities, but it's more than that. I'm forcing my multiple personalities to take over
Yeah.
and adapt to the situation in order to protect the South and the whole, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then, but at a specific time, you find yourself like tapping into like forcing yourself to like adapt in these different situations
Mm.
where to a point where you feel sort of uncomfortable in your skin and sort of tired, and then sometimes I see that when I do that a lot, it really affects me in terms of the way I have the way I have my relationships with my friends, as some of my friends who don't fully understand the full spectrum of who I am
Yeah.
are sometimes confused, like which version of Giggs are we getting? Like who is this human being? Um, and then sometimes when you meet new people, they obviously get one persona of you, and then sometimes when they don't see you after years of not seeing them, and then you come back to them, and then they see a different persona of you. Um, for them, it's like, oh, okay, so is this? I liked that version of Giggs, but now I'm getting a different version of Giggs. But then I think with time and therapy, I started to understand like, hey, I need to accept the different versions of myself that I am, but
Mhm.
also need to understand and accept that I can't always change how I speak to people, and people just really have to take me as I am. If I rock up to the airport and I'm mad and I speak in this language or like this persona,
Yeah.
that is what they have to deal with, and that's all I can give.
Your description of these many different persona just now reminded me a bit of Fanon when he talked about black skin, white masks. And now listening to you, I had the feeling that there are many, not just one mask, but many different masks which you almost felt compelled to put on just to deal with certain situations.
No, absolutely. And and putting on those different masks, I think there's been stages in my life where I couldn't self-identify with specific masks that I had to put on. And then there
Mhm.
were stages in my life, like specific masks I could identify with, but it's taken me time to understand, like, hey, these are
Mhm.
different facets of me, right? Those different facets of me were birthed with the different situations that I had to grow up in. And I think therapy for me really made me understand, like, hey, Gigs, um, you should understand from like a human level that you've really grown up and you were forced to, like, you're plucked out of different situations from a very young age. and you've had to grow up in extreme poverty, and then understand like coming in from extreme poverty, living in middle class, and then be surrounded, and then also moving from middle class to then living within extreme wealth,
Yeah.
and then understanding like how I can really exist in all these worlds, and in existing in all these worlds, I can be surrounded by extreme poverty and still be myself as in like the snobbish, well, quote unquote cheese boy, because that is a part of me, right?
Mm.
And even if people like make fun of me and say, "Hey, you act like this," and then you're like a cheese boy, and then it's like, when I was younger, I would be embarrassed, and then I would change myself just to make people feel comfortable. But
Yeah.
then the older I got, I realized I'm like, yeah, I am that, and that's okay because I'm also like the ghetto kid if I want to, and I can be the ghetto kid if I want to, even when I'm on holiday in Italy and I'm around like millionaires and billionaires, and
Yeah.
it's like I can be who I want to be because I am these people.
Mm. Now, okay, so we've talked a little bit about this big toxic cloud of racism, and I also like to talk about the nice sunshine of diversity. What is your description of diversity? What do you consider its sunshiny aspects? What are its shadowy aspects? And yeah, what's the relevance of this diversity nowadays?
I think diversity comes in different elements in terms of there's diversity in culture. Um, it could be diversity within language themselves, diversity in terms of race. So I feel like diversity is um, having differences that come together, right?
Yeah.
And then them existing within each other, and them existing within each other, accepting, and I think maybe potentially slight drawbacks about the diversities accepting and living in harmony um, would be a thing of maybe sometimes they could be overshadowing. They could
Mm.
be overshadowing of one over the other. They could be the sense of people forcing diversity, right, in this space, um, and forcing diversity in the sense of taking it from face value and saying, hey, because I have different people, there's diversity, but not really engaging in the differences, right?
Mhm.
It's just to fill a quota.
Yeah.
It's just to fit a certain image, right?
Mm.
And I think that could be used in a very negative light. And then I think the sunshine of diversity is like I feel like differences really encourage learning. They really encourage um, a wide spectrum of understanding and
Yeah.
acceptance. And I feel like that's what the world kind of needs more is acceptance of the differences and embracing them.
And in the art world, where do you see the status of diversity nowadays?
Ooh.
I know it's a bit tough one, but maybe some stuff comes to mind.
I think in the art world, it's always interesting because I believe the art world is so different in
Uh-huh.
different places in the world. Um, it's so different in different places in the world, but I feel like diversity in art is seen within the acceptance of media.
Hmm.
I more particularly love it in the acceptance of different mediums being used,
Yeah.
and the mediums of like mode of expressions by different people. And what I do love seeing in terms of like diversity is seeing people who come maybe from a certain discipline really engaging and pushing themselves to embrace a different discipline and learning about that different discipline. So it being like somebody who is inherently an oil painter, but then allowing themselves, say, maybe I would love to express myself through performance, right?
Yeah.
Traditionally, I've been taught oil painting, but like I'm willing to understand what is the history of performance art
Yeah.
and and how performance art is used, and like how can I use my medium of oil painting within performance to express that, right? Because yes, I'm an oil painter, but then in being an oil painter, I can use a performance element within oil painting, as in give a performance where within my performance I am using my medium of oil painting to paint, right? Within the
Yeah.
performance, being painting a body, a physical body, painting a canvas, or painting an environment, right? Um, so I feel like there's the diversity in mediums too, in terms of like the fusion of like mediums. Um, and especially like when a lot of people with artworks, right? There's like mixed media, and a lot of people are like, what is mixed media?
Yeah.
But by playing terms, it's like using different mediums together and using different mediums together. But
Yeah.
I feel like it's so plain to just slap on saying, oh, it's mixed media because I have acrylic, I have oil, and then I have some collage pieces on. I feel like there is a bit of there should be a bit of intention within what is the collage, right? Where does the collage come from? Where
Yeah.
does the oils that you're using come from, or the technique of you're using the oil painting come from, or where is the acrylics coming from, and the technique of acrylic comes from? I feel like there's also diversity in the sense of like um, the creation of the pigments, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's diversity in that, and also the mixture of the pigments that you're using.
So you mentioned this diversity of the media, and I was at the beginning. I just remembered a previous interview I had with my brother Sipo, because he's also an artist, and he complained. Well, not complained. He criticized that Asian art, African traditional art, is often kind of relegated to the status of craft and somehow, not considered um, proper contemporary art, like in the classical sense, which is only the Western Europeans art. How do you see this topic?
I mean, I have to agree with that. It is really relegated in that sense, where even like in the studies of art history, I found myself like, okay, we study art history, and
Mm,
then 95% of the syllabus is European art, and then you study 1%, it being African art, but it's like within the 1% of African art, you literally they cut that 1% to like 10% within the 1%, right?
yeah,
And then it's seen as craft in the sense of like, oh, these were craftsmen instead of being seen as like these were masters at work, right? And these are
yeah,
masters at work because they've inspired a lot of European arts too. But then you then look at within art history, I feel like there isn't documentation of like African art history, or within the documentation of African art history,
yeah,
um, we are not having enough or enough contemporary art historians who are really digging up a lot of like our art history, or really publishing a lot of our art history. And I challenge young people, whoever's listening to this, is like we need to really investigate and study and give more knowledge about this this history that we have, like of our people, and what we've created, and what people consider craft, what it really is, right? We can't box in also African arts to be monolithic. Like Africa is so huge.
yeah,
It can't just be a section on African art. It's like there's there's so many countries
yeah,
on our continent, right? And there's so many kingdoms, right?
yeah,
And there's so much history. So it can really be boxed in. But I feel like in as much as like I feel like it shouldn't be more of us complaining. It should be more of us writing, producing, and really portraying out there into the world this history.
yeah.
Yeah, we need to take a baton on our own hands, and then really place it out into the world, it being in an academic way or it being in a contemporary way.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very the third concept I would like to look at with you is the zooms in on the individual and it's about agency. What to you is a sense of agency, of really being in charge of your own existence? And in your own life, when and where did you have the first feeling of this agency?
I think agency probably comes and goes.
Mm.
I feel like when there's certain sort of tasks that, you know, sometimes as human beings we feel like we're responsible and we should really lead and push forward, uh, or sometimes there's the agency of just listening and observing that we
Yeah.
should really consider. Um, and then there's the agency of like pioneering. For me, agency really has come and go in the sense that I felt like there was agency when I was 18 years old and then having to decide like, hey, I would like to pursue this career right now rather than doing it when I'm 27. Um, Originally, when I was like during that time of high school, I
Mm-hmm.
felt that, you know, the agency was study the traditional roots, study art history, study fine arts, and then once I have the qualifications, I will have then the means to then have the right to call myself an artist
Yeah.
and produce art. But then I realized that, like, hey, I have this agency right now to produce these works, and
Yeah.
I don't need that stamp of approval from anyone, right? This is just something that I would love to produce and get out there. So the agency of painting your truth, I
Mm.
would say, painting your reality, painting your truth. Then there's the call to action agencies of like, you know, if you're in a place of privilege and then you understand that, you know, maybe certain people are not privileged or there's certain um, things happening in the world that you feel like you have a platform to really engage in with your work, right? And
Yeah.
you want to talk about with your work, then there's the agency um, to be an advocate within your pieces of work and like really uh, uh, portray the matters that are like that are happening within our times. Because we look as artists, we are historians and we're documenting history.
Yeah.
Our kids are going to look back to the works that we've created in 50, 100, 500 years and wonder like what was going on in the time and what were artists talking about and what were their standpoint of views and
Yeah.
how are they portraying that through works, right? We look at like cave works, right? If you look at like cave drawings, like cavemen had the first art studios and their agencies at the time was it's portraying to their generation and our their ancestors and like us like what the hunt looked like,
Yeah.
right? And then when we look at the hunt, we don't even see it, but the more we study it, we start realizing like, hey, these were the animals that existed during the time, and these were the animals that were hunting, and this
Yeah.
is how they would, even though some would say like, okay, the way the works were portrayed uh, shows agency of style, right? Like how they were able to like produce the works in terms of like the depicting right their
Yeah.
works and like what self portraits look like, and in those cave drawings were telling stories,
Yeah.
right, that we can decipher over time, and then it also showed weaponry, like what type of weapons they would use to hunt and how they would hunt in like how what groups they would move in and then also then the creation of these cave drawings, we start realizing, hey, there's the agency of like they've created these works, but how did they get those works onto the walls? And then
Yeah.
how were they able to last, right? So because like now we're looking at like these works are archived, and then we start doing our own histories and realizing like, hey, if it wasn't for uh, these cavemen discovering fire, and
Yeah.
then through that fire discovering the wood that they burned, that they discovered charcoal, and then from that charcoal now making marks on the wall, and that very same charcoal, we as artists right now are using in charcoal drawings.
Yeah.
There's an agency for them to like hey, we've created fire. With the creating fire, we're using this byproduct of the fire to create art. And then years later, it's like, hey, people are selling charcoal drawings for millions of dollars, but also people are using charcoal drawings to tell stories, and people are using charcoal drawings to sort of also heal people. So there's the
Yeah.
agency of creating and wanting to create, and not even knowing what that byproduct of creating might cause in the future.
Wow, that's an amazing historical, holistic narrative of this agency. And I wonder, you now, Giggs Kgole, in the midst of the art cosmos in Italy, also in South Africa, what is your present day sense of agency?
My present day sense of agency is building this art center back in my village.
Yeah,
Um so it's something that like I've been really thinking about from 14 years old, just wondering like, hey, you know, if I had a better environment to create art, because even at 14 years old, still felt like I'm so years away from like really honoring my skills and my techniques compared to like my peers, because they had like spaces where they could go create art and also learn about art from kindergarten, right?
hmm,
And then at 18 years old, I realized that, yeah, you know, there's a lot of village kids who already inherently like very talented in terms of like using their hands. And
hmm,
then like 20 years old, when I opened up my gallery, I realized like, okay, my art gallery is based in the city, and I'm using the space to really help contemporary visual artists who are like who just finished high school to like break into the art market. But really, these skills should be developed from like ground level, right? And then later on at 24 years old, realizing, okay, my studies are coming to an end. And
yeah,
now I have a world platform and I have this land that I've just acquired from my village. And I can actually build this art center. But
mm,
I still feel like there's certain things I need to learn. I still need to learn a bit more about how to document and how to archive things, how to learn business too, right? I have to learn business because I can't just build a space that's
yeah,
just gonna be a ghost town. So like, how do I fill that space up with um, holistically with people, and how do I fill up that space with um, good energy? How do I fill up that space with opportunities from not just my village and just not from my country, but my continent and the world? And then right now, fast forward now at 27, I've graduated. And then so like now my sense of agency is okay, Gigs, you've really thought about this, you've really gone to all the art shows that you could go to, you've traveled the world, you know how art museums work, you know how foundations work.
yeah,
Uh, do you still want to do this? And if you do want to do this, how are you going to go about it? And how is it going to affect the community? Because there's also
mm,
the sense of, okay, if this space is then now built and then it brings in tourism, how
mm,
is that rural tourism going to affect the people around, right? How is
yeah,
it going to affect the ecosystem, the natural space? How is it going to affect the people who are employed, the people who are unemployed? So I have
yeah,
to consciously uh, like I don't have the answers for all of that, but I have to consciously think about it, right?
mm,
And also like realize like the byproducts of like that that it could the effects it could have, which are good or bad. And
yeah,
also within the good and the bad, I have to there's a sense of agency of I need to be accountable for this huge world change, right? This world change that I'm gonna be opening up my village to.
mm,
Um, and then I had to also be able to put certain things in place to help people with the bridging of this world change. Because I can't just come in with sort of this, I don't know, colonizer mindset and say, hey, I have the solution for this space and I'm
yeah,
setting this here. I have this knowledge and this is how things are going to run. And everybody has to accept it, right? There has to be a sense of community, and I have to involve the community and see how the community has developed and changed
yeah,
during the times I haven't been with the community. And then also make sure and have a community understand where I am as a person and where I stand and the visions that I have and what I want to bring to the community and like how do we build together, right? Because it's like, hey, it's this is a vision that's coming from me, but it's a thing that is being built for the people. And
Yeah.
then it's like I also have to understand what do the people really want and how do those visions align.
Mm.
And so that's the sense of agency is understanding more how do I uh, bring a family together. So like my middle name is called Honamodze. And Honamodze means Hona is the ability, endless
Yeah.
ability. Mote. Mote means home. And so it's like a
Wow.
home family. So it's like, how do I live up to Honamot? I am Honamot. How do I bring the community together? And then
Yeah.
how do I bring a global community along with this community, right? And like, how do and it's figuring that out. And that's the sense of agency is like, what am I going to do in 2025 in this space?
That's beautiful. You're starting to manifest your name in this communal, multidimensional project. Um, Now I'm gonna, or we are going to try to also have some other questions that tie back or tie together these two parts. And one of them is that you are this visual artist. Now you're also starting or already on the way to this project in your home community. And on the other side, I wonder in your own work, do the topics of racism and or sexism, do they sometimes manifest in some way in your own work? And how so, or why not?
I think they do manifest in my own way, even if it's unconscious, right? There's a subconscious uh, state of, you create and then either it being through visuals, so, or it being through um, sort of the connotations of how the composition of the work is. And sometimes I feel like when they subconsciously manifest through my own work, I when I sit down for like reviews and I have my peers look over the works before I maybe project the works on exhibitions or publicly show them, and my peers really ask me like why this, why the certain word you use there, why this imagery, and
Yeah.
then when I start talking about it, then I start realizing like wow, yeah, this is maybe there are certain traumas that I have and I
Mm,
haven't dealt with, and then I am trauma dumping them onto the world, right?
mm,
And maybe that was not intentional. And then sometimes I had to accept that, hey, um, it wasn't intentional, but it was. That's a piece of my soul that I've left there, and that is the truth, right? That unconsciously I portrayed there, and I have to talk about it one way or another. Specific works are very blunt and it's to challenge it to talk to people and
yeah.
it's to challenge people's thinking and to make people uncomfortable because I think that's what art should be like. Oh, art shouldn't be sunshines and rainbows all the time.
Yeah.
We should make people uncomfortable. We should make people question. We should make people feel. And I feel like artists should remember doing that. They should remember to like help help the person like watches and sees the work
Mm,
question life, question themselves, feel something. Because this life that we live is so limited. We're not immortal. We're not immortal. And in
mm,
this like mortal life that we live, we need to really question and live and feel
yeah.
something.
This brings me to a very long-standing question. For art, what do you think as an artist yourself and then somebody who's now um, bringing or helping bring a creative institution to your village? What do you think is the role of art in fighting the fight against these different forms of discrimination?
I think the role of art can be used as a medium, and one can use that medium as a weapon to tackle something. one could use that medium as a tool of education. One could use that medium as healing um, uh, platform, right? And then I think art can really be used and should be used in all forms to heal people, to attack certain situations.
Mm.
And attack could be in defense or in also in a form of attack, right? Like challenging, questioning, and also maybe and also maybe defending certain things, right? That
Yeah.
if it's a cause that you believe in, right, you have to defend it, right? Um, and I feel like uh, really as a form of education,
Yeah.
and I challenge, I challenge like countries that don't have art in the curriculum to really put it into their curriculum, because it's a form of education in the sense that kids can really relate to and they can express themselves with, right? It's a form of
Mm.
education that even it has a science to it, even though a lot of people don't realize that there is a science to art. Like there's a science to different forms of art, like clay making, firing clay. There's a science to like what temperatures are you heating your clay, what forms of clay are you using, how do you mix clays. There's different sciences into mixing and creating art, and I feel like that should be used in educational institutions too.
I would like to shift now to a bit more your side of the story, and you're in Rome, or not now, but generally speaking, you're in Rome creating your art. What has been the influence of this eternal city on your art and then you as an artist? And maybe you can even tell us why Rome, or yeah, what is the kind of the story? Yeah.
I feel like the obvious story of why Rome is particularly mainly it was Rome as a city for my education.
Mm,
It is a location that obviously the university that Benio for scholarship was located in.
mm,
And then after spending a year in Rome, I I felt that because I spent a year in Rome and then I stopped my education for a year, and then but then after a year of working again and traveling other cities in the world, I was drawn back to go back to Rome for the fact that I realized, like, as an eternal city, it's a city that's managed to cultivate and preserve history. And I
yeah.
find it very fascinating how that history is not only preserved through the physical monuments, but through the stories of the culture and the stories of people and the language
Yeah.
and the pride, right? The pride that the citizens have. The inspiration that I have is the fact that um, when you look at some of the art historians that I got to learn about, like Giorgio Vasari, it's like when you read what they were talking about, when you read about the artists they were talking about, Rome physically has the physical original pieces that these
Mhm.
artists he speaks about, right? And then when I read a little bit about our own art history, like when you hear about like Gerard Sokoto and Dumile Femi, you start realizing like, hey, in order for me to view a Gerard Sokoto art piece or view Gerard Sokoto's a place of burial, I
Mm,
have to go to Paris. And
yeah.
so it's like now I'm an African paying to go view a South African master in a European country, and then I'm
Mm,
paying to go into the museums to go view these works, and then get to learn about this master. And I'm like, I don't even have like that source of inspiration in my own country, right? And then you
mm,
start realizing like, there's a monopoly that people are creating in Europe around art, right? And and this history,
yeah.
right? So it's like it's learning like how this monopoly is being created and how this monopoly is also being preserved, and also like um, how it's being used, right? And also the power of how artifacts have. upon people, right? And I think Rome has been really a city that's kind of like made me understand like the importance of like documenting and preserving histories, and like how do you go about documenting and preserving it, right? And and I guess national identity that can change, that can be built, that can
Mm,
change, and then that can also be used to redefine a new generation.
mm. So we've been circling a bit around these many different influences. Um, you mentioned artifacts, and I was now thinking in terms also of influence, a concept which you mentioned earlier, diversity. Does diversity somehow or in some way insinuate itself or manifest or influence your art?
On a personal level, for me, yes, in the sense of um, when I first started like my creation of my works, between 16 to about 22 years old, was telling untold African stories. And
Mhm.
then that became untold African stories in the sense of untold African stories in South Africa, and then it then developed to untold African stories from Africans in Africa, and then I realized untold African stories through the African diaspora, and then after 22 years old, I really kind of developed a global sense of telling untold stories,
Yeah.
right? Not necessarily just African stories or stories of the African diaspora, right? Because I realized that histories sort of like cross, and like how different cultures and different people have influenced different Africans and African stories and movements of Africans. And I think telling those stories to sort of really align with like understanding myself more, understanding my history more, the African history and world history. So I feel like diversity has allowed me to tell and create art from a historical point of view, but also like be able to tell art from a contemporary point of view in terms of telling my own, documenting my own personal story with like the different people that I get to, who influence me in terms of like the cultures I get to interact with, the foods I get to eat, and the people that I call my friends and my family, who are people from the world, right?
Yeah.
And sort of then telling, remembering like the most important race is the human race before anything else, and it's like how do you then uh, preserve and document and like celebrate the human race?
Yeah. Thank you. That was very eloquently put. Um, because I often in these interviews, I was thinking the people, uh, me including myself, we without even thinking so much about it, we use this idea of race, and then it it kind of becomes real the moment we use it. But we can shift it like you did just now. We can just shift it out till we can have all of us be in this common boat of the human race. For the last third, I like to. Oh no, sorry. This one key question still, because I realized that there are many wildly different opinions on this. So I'm very interested to see what you think, Giggs. And it is this. I interviewed the Swiss playwright called Fatima Moumouni, and she said, and she is this well, she's a playwright, and she also does spoken word, but also she has become basically this really kind of well-known expert on racism, and she was always requested for this workshop, and at one point she said, I don't want to be uh, the Rassismus-Tante, it's the aunt for racism, but she doesn't want to be the person who always has to talk about it. And somebody else mentioned the term racism fatigue. So how do you see this topic, this racism fatigue? What do you make of it?
I mean, I feel like I make of it in the sense that people get exhausted with um, realizing like, okay, maybe this happened to me because of racism, that happened to me because of that. Like, hey, racism fatigue comes from an element of like you've experienced it so much that we know that it's inherent and it exists. But
Mm,
then the real question is, okay, how do you go about it? How do you maneuver spaces, right? How do you challenge people? How do you how do we heal the world, right? How do we what parts are we gonna play to educate people and try to break down the barriers, right?
yeah,
As little as it is, you might change one person's life. That's all that matters because then that
yeah,
person can change somebody else's life. Um, we can cry racism, racism, racism. It's real. It's real. It's
mm,
real. And it's real. Some people say we can't change it. Possible. Some people say we can change it. Change it. Possible. I think it's all a mindset of like, what can we do? But it's also there's systematic things that we need to change. That there's definitely systematic things that we need to change, and I think we can talk about it and cry about it, but it's like, what are we doing on an individual basis
yeah,
to change, right? And like it could, like I said, it could be one person or changing a system. What are
yeah,
we doing as individuals? What are we doing as individuals to really kind of promotes the human race and really like figure that out. I always laugh with my friends and I tell them like, you know what, there's still a lot that we have to go through as humans. And
yeah,
if we had an interplanetary uh, war where another species came to Earth,
mm,
and it could go into two faults. It could be they come peacefully or they come unpeacefully. And if they come unpeacefully, we as the human race are not ready for this war because we can't even stand together,
yeah,
right? And who knows when we're ever going to get the chance to stand together. But that is something that we need to push forward as humans. It's pushing forward to let's stand together.
mm,
Let's embrace our differences and embrace them and accept them, embrace them, and like really work towards like just acceptance, really acceptance, and like and and just encouraging like, hey, you know, let's let's not make life more difficult than it should be for our fellow
mm,
peers.
yeah. Thank you very much for those beautiful and poignant words. Now, for the last part, or the second to last part, I would like to do this kind of more. You will see if you're okay with it. This part, it's more kind of call and response, and I call it non-trigger trigger, which I mean trigger for thinking and non-trigger because it, of course, shouldn't be triggering in the traumatic sense we use nowadays. So non-trigger trigger, and the idea is I give you a word or an expression, and then you can say one word, you can say one sentence, just something a little, yeah, a little response.
Okay, let's go for it.
Okay. White cube,
Break it.
gas lamp,
Opportunity.
3D, three-dimensional,
Space.
Instagram,
A trap hole.
William Kentridge,
Interesting.
art for art's sake,
Why?
Limpopo,
The land of infinity.
fame,
Overrated.
good for nothing.
A show I would love to do again.
Basquiat,
Would love to give him a hug.
ancestors,
They remain in all of us.
And finally, black, brown, yellow, white.
Beautiful, inspiring, and the human race. Beautiful, inspiring, and what makes us human.
Thank you very much. Now, the very last bit, first one is one or two or three or four or five personal practices which you have applied in your own life and that, in your opinion, have had a positive impact.
Never forget to say hello. Never forget to say thank you,
Mm.
even when people are mean to you. We put on smiles for ourselves. You should always put on a smile for yourself and never forget to make yourself laugh. It's really, really important to like take care of that inner child within you and
Mm.
also understand that belief always starts within you before it comes from the world. Always believe in yourself first before anybody else believes in you.
Yeah. Then is there maybe something that is an absolute no-go and total no-no?
Absolute no go, total no no is just violence.
Mm.
I have to practice that myself, but just violence.
Mm.
Violence against yourself or violence against other people.
Mm. Um, in literature, in art, in many different fields, we have like some form of classical, Western, or Eurocentric canon. If you were to create your own canon um, in art or in another field, what would be three of its members?
Hmm.
Tough one, sorry.
Yeah, tough one. Three of its members in
Yeah.
my world would be um, Jero Sokoto, Ayanda Mambula,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother, Charlotte Hall.
Excellent. I love that. That's fantastic. I think it's so difficult to find the full measure of appreciation for one's parents. I just, sorry, I just became, we became parents a year and a half ago, and every day it's on my mind. Every day I'm thinking what my dad did and what my mom did, and it's like, so when you do this canon, this kind of canon with your mom, it's fantastic. Thank you very much. And then one question for one person, dead or alive.
My one question would be, and you'll probably see this one day, is Vincent from Bon Iver.
Mhm.
My one question is, can we have a collaboration, it being in a form of music or art? Because there's something I want to express to you from a human being to a human being that I feel like um, is I want to give to you. So
I'll,
Vincent from Bon Iver.
I'll be super curious to investigate him because I'm not familiar yet, but I'll be curious to investigate. Um, Book recommendations. Some books you would dearly ask the viewers to look into.
The Power of One. Um, yeah, I'll give The Power of One as a book recommendation.
And maybe some movies or series which you've been viewing and that have kind of inspired you or left positive, fuzzy, warm, good feelings.
Uh, Two movies. Interstellar
Hmm.
and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Ah, I've been wanting to see that for a long time, so now I'm motivated. Thank you.
Give it a watch. Give it a watch.
The last one is, are there recurring questions or issues that pester you or that just are not that keep coming back to you?
I think a recurring question for me is um, when am I going to spend time with them?
Hmm.
And them changes for me all the time. But because I find myself with this nomadic life, the hardest thing is always consistently saying goodbye to the people that you love.
Hmm.
Um, and on when you've built home and family in different parts of the world,
Hmm.
you're always longing for home.
Yeah.
And even as much as you build home within yourself, the people that you love, you're always consistently saying goodbye to them.
Yeah.
And I always find myself that I'm going out on this quest in life to learn and just learn and give to the world. But there's people I always leave, and I always
Mm.
ask myself, like, when am I going to give time to them?
That's beautiful thought. So thank you very much, Giggs. This is already all the questions I have for you today. It's been really a great pleasure and very inspiring to listen to you. And
No, thank you so much. And yeah, in 25, definitely for sure, because um, I'll be I'll be based in Budapest, but
yeah.
I'm really excited because in December I'll be finally dropping a new EP of mine, which is just like
Ah,
a combination of like my feelings and mood from the whole year, but
yeah,
also like what's like being here in Cyprus has been kind of like my solitude to like really put my thoughts together within this
yeah.
that I'll be dropping in December before I leave for South Africa.
Wow. So you also
It's going to be titled Rai, which
Mm.
is GAE. In my home language, it means home.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like a goodbye to Rome for being my home for the last 5 years.
yeah,
Sort of like a hello to my going back high, like going back home to South Africa.
yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of like an homage to that.
That sounds very fascinating. So yeah, wow. You are really multimedia. That's fantastic. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna let you go. And hey, thank you again so much. This is really extraordinary. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Temba.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye. Bye bye.